It's my privilege to introduce Joe McHugh, who is currently Vice President of State Supported Services and Business Development at Amtrak. As many of you know, Joe has been with Amtrak for a number of years, I think just over 26 to be exact, and most of those years have been leading Amtrak's government affairs. What you may not know about Joe is he is planning on retiring very soon, which is going to be a huge loss to this industry. Joe is someone who you just can't replace. And he has a whole lot of institutional knowledge, which is going to be leaving Amtrak. But one thing I know about Joe is he's invested himself in many of the people at Amtrak, so they'll be in good hands. One other thing you may not know about Joe is he's an avid book reader and has most likely, and a collector, and has most likely visited your local bookstore in your hometown over the years. And Joe, we just want to welcome you and look forward to hearing from you. So go ahead.
Very nice, Sal. Thank you so much. I appreciate your kind words. And yeah, there's a number of us who have left in the last few years who really, I think in many cases, not just the founding fathers of Section 209, our founding folks for 209, but have put in lots and lots of years. And you're right, I joined the company in July of '94, and there were still some people at Amtrak who were here at the very beginning. It was an interesting period of time to work at Amtrak because it really spanned sort of what the company was becoming and what it's become today. And we've gone through some really good times. We've gone through some really eerie times during those 26 years. But it's gone by. I mean, I'm sure you look at your career too, Al. I mean, it's just where have all the years gone? You wake up one day and there you are. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to our next chapter in life, and I'm going to just take a big holiday here as soon as I leave in late September and read a lot more of my books, and I have over 1,000 of them, and do some traveling when traveling is safe again and desirable again, and just enjoy my time. Meg and I are going to just enjoy life together. So thank you, and thanks very much for inviting me. A real pleasure. We have a lot of these conferences every year, and I think this is by far one of the best. I think it's a very focused, it's a great group of people who come together. I like the way the program is set up. I think it's very interactive, and I wish we could all be there together in person. I mean, this works, and this has to work. A great job by Posse and by David to pull this off. Really great kudos to you guys for doing this, because it's important that we keep our networks up and keep information flowing, but it would be so much more fun to be together, and enjoy our times. So I was thinking a lot, because not as Al mentioned, this is, I guess, going to be the last address I make, public address, if you will, in my career at Amtrak here. And so I really was giving it a lot of thought. And I want to talk a little bit about sort of the nature of what these times, this COVID time has done to us here at Amtrak, and sort of how we see ourselves, working through this. But I'd like to start by going back in time a little bit. At least in my lifetime, and probably every one of yours who's joining this seminar, we used to think that the big event, apart from childbirth and marriages and graduations, the big thing was 9/11. Remember? I mean, after 9/11, we used to talk about the world before 9/11 and now the world after 9/11. And it was a very scary time because it brought forth so much of our vulnerabilities as a nation. And even though it was over, in one day, the effects just lasted for years. And I remember, as Al said, I ran the government affairs group here for really the majority of my career at Amtrak. And you'll remember the airlines were all down. Nobody was traveling. And we got a call from one of our committees, I guess it was the Appropriations Committee, and they asked us, would you transport us up to New York? We want to take a group of congressional people up to do that. And we took them up on it. It was 10 days later after the event. We put on our office car on the back of one of our regional trains, and as I said, we were the only thing running, and off we went. And they still had the site open, and so they took us down there, and it was still smoking. I mean, it was still very much a live crime scene, and it would be like going to Pearl Harbor on December 17th. I mean, I was my thought at the time, and I thought I'll never live through another thing as as awful as this, or as sort of changing as this. And what happened afterward, right? I mean, look at what came about. The government reorganized itself. It was more than just, the effects have been more than just longer lines at airports. Pretty much everything we do, from the phones we use to the technology that we're using today, was born in part as a result of 9/11. Not everything about it, I guess, was bad. It was awful. But some of the things that came out of it reshaped how we communicate with each other, how we act as a community with each other, and how we protect each other, as a nation. George Bush said right after the event, he said, we're going to be at war with these terrorists for probably a decade. And he was right. But today, living in Washington, D.C. and commuting on the subway before the virus, I really felt a lot safer that I was not going to be part of a terrorist attack, because this country did a pretty effective job of shutting a lot of it down. It's still there, could still come back in some ways, but we have really amazing people who work at that and have become very good at that. And we have sort of adapted and moved on. This event that we're still struggling through is going to have even greater changes on all this. And, all of you have either been part of conversations or you've thought about this yourself, that what is going to be the other side and what it's going to look like. And it's hard to contemplate that because, right now we're still struggling through it day by day. We're reading the grim, box scores of viruses and of those who are suffering and those who have passed away. It is just a part of our everyday life at this point, and it will be going on for a while. I wrote down some notes. You just have to forgive me here. I got a little bit ahead of myself. I think the question, is in terms of how we come through this, sort of like what do we plan for, what do we build for, and what do we do? I mean, it's sort of what a lot of us in this group, this community here on this seminar do. What do we plan and what do we build for as we come out of this? Because everything is going to be reshaped. I was thinking, we're sitting here today in our headquarters office at 1 Massachusetts Avenue Northwest. We had been from 1989 until 2016 located at Union Station up the street, about a block. And we moved here September 3, it'll be 4 years ago. And we went from an office structure that really looked like and felt like the late 80s and early 90s to something that was very much, in the moment. Everything is hooked up. We've got TVs and monitors. We have an in-house broadcasting system here that we did not have at Union Station. We have all of our train arrivals and departures, on every floor. We have 4 floors in this building. And, it's all ADA compliant. The HVAC system works. The old system, some of the rooms were super hot, others were super cold. When they cleaned the pipes, we had literally black water for a couple of days and black ice cubes. It was an old building that was in desperate need of work. But in a matter of a couple of weekends of moving, we went from 1990 to 2020, if you will. In this office, before the COVID, 450 people came to work here every day. Now, I have found that working from home is not as pleasant as I thought it might be. And so I was a gamer for a few of the first few weeks of this, but I've been coming in pretty much every day of the week. I come in about 4 out of the 5 days of the week. And I am joined by about 11 other people on a given day, 11 other people. And a lot of the folks who work here at headquarters live in DC. And some of them, live within walking distance. Others, can drive here in fairly short order. There's like no traffic on the streets. But they would prefer to work at home. We had a big meeting last week to go over the budget and plan for next year. And our group came in for the meeting. It was with our CEO, Bill Flynn, and some others. I was in and I stayed the rest of the day. My colleagues, as soon as the meeting was over, they went back home and were working from home. And it really sent a message to me that we're going to be very different, as we come out of this and as things are reshaped. And I will tell you, new homes, every new home will have an office, probably 2, for people to work in. And that will be a selling feature about how that office is set up so that you can work from home. Just like rec rooms and guest rooms were the big thing, after World War II. in-home offices, I'm sure, are going to be the next big thing going forward. And I'm pretty certain, just like after 9/11, the government's going to reshape itself. It's not going to be Health and Human Services. It's going to be something that is going to be much more attuned to the pandemic and preventing future pandemics and how you respond to these kinds of things faster, quicker, and better than we have done so far. And so there will be a lot of opportunity, and things will change. Government will change. The private sector will change. There will be a lot of, again, opportunity for folks to go to work in areas that are specific to preventing these types of diseases, building the apparatus to cope with them when they happen, and other types of work that will spin out of that, just like the security business was such a big business back 15 years ago after 9/11. It was interesting to me. There was an article in today's Washington Post. I printed it out. I didn't have the hard copy. Metro here in Washington, D.C., WMATA, is losing $2.5 million a day. And they're really just hanging in there. They have barely enough cash to get through. I mean, they're going to be looking like a lot of organizations are for federal help, and they will probably get it. But they are really, really, really in desperate straits. Now, to their credit, they've been doing a lot of work. They've been taking advantage of the downtime by doing a lot of work, just like a lot of the cities are paving streets. But they went around the horn in the area here in our sort of three, Virginia, Maryland, and the district, and companies who were planning to come in and fund road improvements and then get the benefit of the tolling from the sort of the private sector, if you will, in the highway business, are rethinking that, because I think the whole tolling structure is going to be completely changed. People who are planning city development here are looking at the fact that maybe in the future, folks are not going to want to live in densely populated areas simply because these types of viruses and disease spread faster here than they do in areas that are not so densely populated. So does that mean that the movement to the city is no longer going to be a feature of American life, that it's going to change? And how do you plan for that? And just on and on and on. I mean, it just cascades. Here we are, a company this year, 49 years old. Every year that I've been here, we would have to go to Congress and defend our need for operating support. I can't tell you how many amendments we have had to bat down over the years, how many vote counts we've had to provide and count that as for amendments that wanted to eliminate some of our services, eliminate from food and beverage right down to the long distance trains, all of that. And because in speeches that be given on this House and Senate floor about why are we funding these money-losing trains and so on and so forth. And we always had our heroes to stand up for us: Joe Biden, Frank Lautenberg, a number of folks, Dick Durbin, who would stand up and make the case that we're all in this together, and just like we fund water investments for Arizona, Senator McCain, to benefit your state, so too you should fund what we need to satisfy our transportation needs here in the Northeast Corridor and elsewhere around the country. And this year would have been the first year that we would have gotten to a point where we had no operating deficit, that we would have actually broke even and bettered it by about $20 million. We felt that we were on the cusp of catching this unicorn, right? And I often used to dream about that. I think about, gosh, wouldn't it be great? What it's going to be like when we don't have to defend this anymore, even though it's worth defending, that box has been checked off. Well, along comes COVID, and all of that's dashed, right? So instead of running a $20 million positive operating support, we're looking at somewhere between a $600 and $700 million loss. Same time, we went out and ordered 28 new high-speed train sets, which will be delivered sometime toward the end of next year, 2021 calendar year. We ordered them because our Acela service was just taking off. We'd have many trains were sold out on the peak hours. We were looking at train sets that have been running in service for 20 years and run hard. I mean, we run them up and down the corridor. We run them at high speed. They're heavy machinery, so there's a lot of stress on that. So we decided we would order 28. So we'd have 8 more. And you know what? Instead of having 6 coaches, we'd have 8. We'd expand the size of the train set by about 30% more capacity. And we're still banking on the fact that it's going to come back. We're still, putting our hopes here in that service, because it will be beautiful when it comes. We're also, improving our facilities. We're lengthening our train sheds, our servicing facilities where we hold our trains and our yards, and not us but others, but we're participating, are building a beautiful and magnificent new train station in New York City. And I hope to God that people are still, going to want to take the trains in numbers like that. But here we are, all of us, 200 or so, all connected and handling this meeting this way. So, the technology has proven that it can be done, and maybe not every trip needs to be taken or every conference has to be, in person. And that's something we're going to have to be looking at. We're looking at ordering new intercity train sets to satisfy our state services and to replace the AM fleets, which were put into service in the mid-1970s. So I think it's 75 train sets is what the order is contemplating. And again, we're sort of taking a bet on the future that things will return to some semblance of what they were beforehand, and that people will still want and need to take services that, like Amtrak, that will now have new equipment, but the investment of this is in the billions of dollars. So it's going to be a very, very interesting way to see how this plays out when we finally get to what will someday be the other side, we hope. I wanted to also, let's see, there's a couple of other points I wanted to make, and then we can open it up if we want to have a discussion. And it may be that for a while, the virtual, it may be too, that it's a fad, right? I was thinking about this as well, the notion of working from home every day. There was a time, right, and Al will remember this, because we're all sort of, those of us who are, in our late 50s, 60s, if you will, there was a time, not too long ago, when you'd plan a family vacation, and you would plan a vacation, let's say, at the beach, and you would leave on Saturday morning and you would come back the following Saturday or Sunday. And for that week, you were gone. I mean, no one really went after you. You weren't able to check emails. I remember, back in the day, I was working at the Department of Education. I had a political job there. And when we went away for our week's vacation, I would work late on Friday night to get everything done as much as I could, because I knew that I wasn't going to be there for a week and no one could really get me, right? Because the technology really didn't exist to do that. But over time, right, we have found that you really, really have a hard time taking a day off, particularly if your job is demanding, particularly if you have large responsibilities, if you're in business for yourself, it tends to be more so. You're constantly looking at your phones to see if there's any emails, you're getting calls. Oh, I didn't realize you were on vacation, but could you help me out anyway? So there's really, it's very hard to have a quote unquote real day off, okay? In a few weeks, Al and I will have that sense, but right now, that's not the case. And I think, you do get some, at least for me, some separation when you go to work, and you leave work and you go home. And home is like your refuge. Home is the place you go to kind of get away from it all. It's where you can kick back. And now home is going to also be where you work, and for many people. And I think some obviously can sort of deal with that. I personally can't. And we'll see over time whether or not it is something that was not a fad so much as just something that over time, maybe wore out its luster, and there will be a return to an office place. But it remains to be seen, how that will manifest itself. And also, you ask yourself, how important is it to have the personal relationships? How important is it to use them both as a way to enrich your life, right? Because, I believe that the real treasure we have in life is not the money you have in the bank, but the friends we have, the family we have. And so how important is it, to maintain these personal and professional relationships, which are best done, not like this in every case, but in the ability to be together, right? To be together and to interact and engage with each other in person. And how will that balance be struck going forward? How will it be struck in education? I mean, even before COVID, there was a movement toward the whole idea of getting your degree online, right? And that's going to probably become more and more the norm. And so we really, when you think about, the whole work life, education, how much of it is going to be better online versus in the classroom, or what's the right mix? These are all the things that we're going to have to plan for. Now, I will say too that even though we are still, struggling through what we have to do to get through this as a company, we took a number of steps starting in March that I think have helped ameliorate some of the issues that would worry people the most about this crisis. We have regular communications with our employees. We started out by having weekly town halls. They've moved to, I think it's bi-weekly. And we have quarterly business updates. And the invitation that we've been encouraging all of our employees to have an email address. Not everybody does, and you can understand that because a lot of our folks work in the field and they're in gangs that rove around. So it's very difficult. They don't have an office to go to. But we've encouraged them, if you have a laptop, please get an Amtrak email so that you can stay in touch with what's going on. And I would say the company's done a good job of trying to communicate what we know when we know it to our employees. We have regular messages coming out via email from our in-house corporate communications group, and we have had regular town hall meetings with our CEO and the other leadership in the company, and I think it's helped. I mean, it's been a good way to keep people communicated with. We've also not furloughed anyone. We've kept everybody we've kept everybody employed. We have tried to rotate our crews. Most of them are on the extra board, but we do rotate them so they're continuing to be familiar with their territory and to keep up their operating skills and requirements. And that's costly, but I think, we're trying to do the right thing by our employees because it takes a lot of time and effort to recruit and train good employees, and you don't want to lose them. And you want to give them a sense too that the company does care. So here we are now in about our 6th month of this, and we're still holding tight on that. I opened up a regular weekly call in our first or second week of March with all the states who wanted to call in and participate, and we kept that going through June, and then we moved it to every other week. But we tried again very hard to keep the lines of communication open with our state partners. Both to hear what they had to say and to hear what we saw coming from the service lines and from demand and efforts we were taking to make our trains clean and safe and our crews clean and safe. And so we do that. We continue to do that, and I feel like we've had good engagement with the states on the issues that matter because they're topical, and we divide the hour in half. We talk for half and then we listen for half. And so we're going to continue to do that. So I think on that front, the technology has really been effective and it's really helped us. And I think it's allowed us to sort of keep up with what we need to know. But as I said, time will tell if this is going to be as effective. Now, I will just sort of close here by saying a couple of things apart from the communications and all that, we are still moving on a series of expansions. There's still opportunities to grow the service. If any of you follow the congressional efforts underway, you'll note that there's sort of a pent-up interest on the part of many, particularly in the House, of spending a lot of money on infrastructure. The House bill that would reauthorize Amtrak, which is part of a larger surface reauthorization, was going to pump $10 billion of extra money into rail development. That's a lot. That's a lot of money that would come our way through the grants program, some directly to Amtrak, and money spread elsewhere. But that's huge. I mean, we used to fight over half a billion dollars for funding back in the late 90s and early aughts, and now they're measuring it in billions, which is excellent. That's what it should be. The amount we got last year from Congress was about $2 billion. We again asked for $2 billion this year, the majority of it all in capital. We asked then for supplemental funding of about 1.5 billion more. So our ask right now is about $3.5 billion. Congress is trying to figure out what they're going to do for us and for others. The House has passed their bill. As I said, it's quite sizable. The Senate is still deciding how it's going to shape a bill and then move a bill, what the timeline will be. But we would hope to know that, before, the end of September. We will probably be on a continuing resolution going forward. I mention all that because at the beginning of the Obama administration, the ARA money, which was the stimulus money, was put into the system for development of projects which were shovel ready and would create work. We had a fairly good list, and we moved very quickly to secure the funding and to make recommendations about where it should be spent. And a lot of good projects came out of that. Expansions in the Midwest came out of that. Improvements in Virginia came out of that. There was a whole lot of other ideas. There was a high-speed rail program in Florida. There was one in Wisconsin that did not happen. But by and large, the money was pretty well spent around the country on projects that today have yielded additional frequencies and some new service. So right now, next year, when you look at 2021, and I would tell you, if this was not in the time that we're at, if I was out there, I would have given you the straight up, here's how we plan to expand the service over the next few years and lay out all the ones that we're working on. The one that's going to happen, I think, next year is our expansion of service from Rutland up to Burlington, Vermont, which Burlington's the largest city up in that area, certainly the largest city in Vermont. And that will clear a faster path to New York City for people coming from that area up there. And that's the state sponsoring that. It's publicly owned track. And so we have, we don't have to deal with a lot of some of the freight issues that come up when we try to expand. It's pretty much on our own terms. That's coming. We're working closely with Illinois and Wisconsin on a second frequency up to Minneapolis, St. Paul. That's very achievable. We're looking to expand the Hiawatha service. We'd like to get the 8th frequency later next year or early in 2022, and then 9 and 10 to follow. We're still working through issues primarily with the host railroad up there, but we're engaged in those discussions. Illinois is also looking at service out to the Quad Cities, which would eventually open up service into Iowa if we're successful. We're looking at service on the Gulf Coast through Mobile, New Orleans, 2 daily round trips. We've been tied up in negotiations with CSX, who owns the majority of that track, and NS, which owns the last or first 3 miles, depending on which direction you're going, on traffic studies and how we would, manage what infrastructure would be needed to support that service. We're working with Virginia on their big transformative project that's primarily in Northern Virginia on the RFMP. And we are working with Michigan, and that's where I'm going to end this discussion here. We're working with Michigan on a comprehensive plan to improve the service into and out of Michigan and Chicago. We had looked at, there were a number of projects that we had been talking about and that Michigan had been talking about that would increase frequency potentially and reduce speed and really make improvements in the infrastructure and some of the stations that would bring a better level of service to the passengers. And so we took all of these and we organized them into one big endeavor, if you will. And that includes stuff in Chicago, like a new entrance on the reuse of the St. Charles airline, using it differently, of bringing our trains directly into Union Station without having to go through the backup move that we typically do to get in and out of the station off of the old Illinois Central line. We're in talks with the South Shore, South Bend, NICD, the railroad, the commuter road, of actually using their tracks into and out of Chicago to get ourselves off of the heavily congested Norfolk Southern Chicago line. We're looking at improvements that would tie the tracks together coming into New Buffalo so that we could have Pere Marquette and our Wolverine service stop, both in New Buffalo, looking at improvements up and down the Michigan line. And we took the presentation to our friends over at the DOT, to Al and his crew over there, and we're working together. In fact, there'll be an application for one of the grant programs going forward for some improvements on track structures this year, and we would look to do more improvements. This is very achievable. It's very gettable over the next 5 to 6 years, and it's not, bone in the throat expensive. It's stuff that's doable. So we're going to continue to do that and plan, because the future is born of good planning, and good planning will always drive good decision making. And so we're going to be doing that. The Midwest is very fertile for development, and it's very fertile for a number of reasons. It's got very mature programs out there, and the folks who are running them sort of know the business, and they look at their service not as their service, but as part of a larger network, a larger Midwest network. And so they're buying equipment together, and they're planning together, and they're talking with each other. And some of this is the legacy of Tim Hefner, who really sort of was a trailblazer in trying to get the Midwest region to talk as a region and to think as a region as opposed to individual states. And so the work will continue. I look forward as a citizen to signing up and coming out next year so I can get a chance to see all you good people and reminisce a little bit. I won't be looking for work. I'll just come out in friendship. I will come in peace. And with that, I just want to thank you for your attention today, and I hope I didn't go too far over my time allotment, but I appreciate your invitation and the time you've given me to hear what I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And looking at the question and answers, the first thing I need to do is, there's an overwhelming response here led by Tim Hefner to thank you for all of your hard work at Amtrak and Intercity Passenger Rail. So I want to make sure you hear that, because it's overwhelming on here. And then one of the short questions was, would you speak about the plan to reduce long distance train frequencies to 3 days a week?
Well, this has been a really difficult, decision for the company to make, because it just was a very, very difficult decision to make. The ridership across the system is low. I mean, on a typical day, Amtrak will carry about 105,000 people per day, and we're carrying about 15,000 today. Now, I will say that a lot of folks who are using the services are using the long distance trains, but I get all the pages. I still do. From when I ran the communications group here, I still get them, and you will see when we have incidents out there that the number of people who are on the trains is small. We had some, and this is not now, but like 4 or 6 weeks ago, we would have certain trains where we had more crew than passengers on board, and it is. I think it's important, in these times of uncertainty, that there's some things that remain certain. That the train goes through town in each direction at least once a day is something I think that is for some communities comforting. But it is a lot to put out all that equipment and to take sort of all that risk to handle a couple dozen passengers. So we've been going back and forth. I haven't, but the government affairs folks have been going back and forth with Congress. I mean, there's a great wariness on their part. They want to make sure that if we are reducing service, that there's clear understanding of when it will come back. So what are the metrics and what is the restoration plan? And we've been working with them to hone that plan and to have that finalized. So I think right now, the plan will be to go to 3 times a week, starting October 1st, which is the beginning of the fiscal year. Now, it's quite possible, this has happened before, that Congress will tell us, something different, tell us that is not going to be allowed. And I think, we'll have to see what the funding level is, and that'll be tied to the overall decision. But there's still tremendous support up on Capitol Hill for the national system. There really is, and I've always sort of wondered and worried about that myself. But it is, and it's not just Democrats. It's a bipartisan support for the national system. So I think, our job here is to try to manage this as efficiently and as well as we can. I think we have to keep the interests of our employees, uppermost in mind. And I think that whatever we do here, we have to understand that Congress will have a say in the final analysis.
Mm-hmm. Another question related to on-time performance. Do you think there's a workable relationship that could be established with the host railroads in regards to on-time performance?
Well, tomorrow when Jim McClellan comes your way, I hope someone will ask him as well. Yeah, I think so. I mean, yes, I do. I do believe that there has to be a way to do that. I mean, right now, believe it or not, with the amount of service we're out there, our on-time performance numbers are really very good. In fact, some of the states, are paying a lot more in their incentive fees than they had budgeted for because the service that they're running is running so well on time. And, every morning when I get up, the trains that I look at to sort of tell me if the world is right, OTP-wise, is typically 48 and 49 and 29 and 30 because by the time I get up, they're kind of slogging their way through, Western Ohio and Eastern Indiana, or the even numbered trains have gone through there. And if they're on time, generally the world is pretty good. If they're running really, really late, then typically there's something amiss around most of our services. So the on-time performance has been running well because we're in a reduced pattern. The other side of this question too, to me, is, and I try to keep up with this with Railway Age, is really what is the state of the railroad industry itself? What is it going to look like when this is over? Are people going to be buying as many cars? Is as much stuff going to be shipped on rail as it is on Amazon? We just noticed that I guess Amazon is just starting to ship some of its packages by rail. Will that become more of a trend or not? And how will their business fare? And what will that mean for us? Long way around saying that we work with the freight railroads through our host railroad group every week, and I still believe that at the end of the day, it's in their best interest to move us on time so as not to clog up their system. When Congress passed the PRE-Act back in 2007, the standards and metrics that were applied to the host railroads, and they did not like them at all. It was a very difficult issue. But Congress prevailed, and for a while we saw really good on-time performance. In fact, I'll never forget, there was a day, I think it was in 2008, where the whole system was at 100%. It was the only time in my youth that everything on that day ran at 100%. And then as soon as the Supreme Court overturned that, we saw an immediate, degradation of on-time performance. So, I mean, I do think some of the pressure stuff does work. It's a shame that it has to be that way. This will be one of the issues, Al, that Congress will be taking up in the reauthorization, sort of find the balance between the interests of the freights and the need to run passenger service. And I'll tell you one last thought. The more investment that the public puts into the infrastructure, the more of a stake they have on seeing the trains run on time. So that also should be an inducement.
Yeah. We had another question about what is your impression of the steps the House appropriators and authorizers have taken in respective bills and state-supported services?
Well, I think very good by and large. I mean, I moved over to this function, this job, in like it was January of 17. So I had the benefit of the full year of dealing with committee staff up there. And the thing about the committee staff really made us look good. The government affairs people at Amtrak. I mean, we had a fairly tight knit group. Our government affairs is very small, and we don't hire any outside help. We do it all ourselves, and we build our relationships. We're up there and we're responding to their requests and trying to be helpful every way we can. And I found that the group that I had to deal with were just some of the finest people I had the pleasure of working with. I mean, the kind of people you would hope would seek jobs in public policy areas. And they worked together. They did not divide among partisan lines. They worked together, they socialized together, and they really knew Amtrak, and they really held our feet to the fire. I mean, they asked good questions, probing questions. They stayed on top of things. They were a great group to work for. That all changed because a number of them just left and got other jobs, and things moved on. But the group that's here today, I think, are very interested in learning a lot about Amtrak. They are very concerned about the states. They want to make sure that we don't lose any state services. Neither do we. So I think that no matter what they do with the larger Amtrak appropriations, they will protect the states. We have asked for $260 million of funding to aid the states. That's up from the $239 we got under the CARES Act. The good news is, and Al knows this because we've been trying to socialize this with the states, is that we've been managing it pretty well. I say we the states, Amtrak, FRA, have been managing the funds very well, the allocation of that money, and it's not tied to a fiscal year. It was a sort of a bailout bill that they passed. So if there's this continuing resolution, it's not like that money continues into the next fiscal year. But there's enough cash left over at the end of September to get us through October, November, and probably at least, we think, the first half of December, which is really good because if there is a continuing resolution, I would imagine the first tranche of that will be through the middle of December. And how that gets resolved will depend on a number of things, including, the result of the 2020 election. So, but at least for the states, it's one less thing to have to be worried about. We're going to run out of money at the end of September. What are we going to do until this year? It gives them a little bit of float. So, there's the House put a big number in. Yeah, they did a very big number, and I think the Senate will come through. We don't have any definitive word, but our indications are that they probably will because they don't want to see this go away. Because once it goes, it's gone.
Yeah. I had a follow-up on on-time performance, I think, a little bit. It's Graham Claytor believed that PTC would improve running time and running time reliability. Has Amtrak experienced that yet?
I guess the short answer is probably not as emphatic as what Mr. Claytor thought at the time. I do believe, that PTC is this generation's contribution, this generation of railroaders' contribution to the safety of the industry, right? And I think that as it continues to mature as a system, you will see some of the benefits in terms of how you manage traffic and the ability maybe to run at slightly higher speeds. I mean, clearly now with PTC on some of these services, we can run at 90 where we were stuck at 79 or even higher speed, right? But we're still having issues here and there on initializing the PTC on a regular basis. It's not systemic and it's not, one of these, it's not debilitating, but on any given day, you'll have a couple of trains that have not been able to initialize. So it tells me that they're still working the bugs out in the system. But I think, within the next, we're going to have all of our stuff completely done. We had a few miles here, a few miles there, around stations and in certain areas that are going to be completely PTC'd. And, going forward, new service is going to have to be on lines that have PTC, or if they're still issuing the mainline track exemptions, the MTEAs, some type of certification or risk mitigation that we can run safely. So I think that, and then the big contribution is going to be just, we're not going to have the kind of accidents that we've had in the past as a result of overspeed or running into something that shouldn't be there.
Had several comments about Amtrak's, if it's still on Amtrak's radar, to run some service into Canada.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, we just redecked, you'll be happy to know, we just redecked the Niagara Falls Bridge. this past year, which tells you that we would continue to want to run to Toronto. Yeah, I mean, we saw, surprisingly, we're not running the Adirondack north of I guess not north of Albany or to Schenectady. I can't remember, but we've seen a rise, believe it or not, of ridership at Schenectady. That's growing faster than at Albany over the last quarter because it's sort of become a collection point because we're not running any services north of there and people are driving now down. That's the nearest place that they can hop on a train. We want to run service obviously back up to Vancouver, BC. And I hope those services come back. I mean, Canada, I suspect the border will probably be closed at least until Thanksgiving, our Thanksgiving, if not the whole year. And the big business on the Seattle-Vancouver service is really the cruise line business. I mean, we do tremendous amount of transportation on the cruise, connecting to the cruise ships. And that is all, I mean, who knows? If you think you've got problems, if you own a cruise line, wow, what's the future there? And, we talked a while ago, and I suspect this question drives mostly to the issue around extending service from Detroit over and into Canada and up to Toronto that way, the way the old international, used to operate. And that's something that we would really like to get into. And it was, and sort of when I think about all the things that we could be working on, it was not up there, but it was kind of there. And the other question too, and I talked to Dave Dunn a lot. He and I became really good friends when he was the CEO, and we kept up our friendship. So we talk every week and catch up on stuff. And he's very worried that there's not going to be anything left of VIA when this is all over, except Montreal to Quebec service. When we ran the international, you all remember it was a VIA train when we got to Sarnia on the other side, and it ran up just as the Maple Leaf today on the Canadian side is a VIA operation. So I think we would like to do it. We believe that there's vitality between those two cities, and it also sort of while we're talking about it. One of the great quests here would be to find a way to use the Detroit station, the magnificent Detroit station. So there's a lot of opportunity with Michigan. Tim and I used to talk about this a lot because when you really do the work, and a lot of it now has been done. I mean, obtaining the second half of the line to Detroit was a major get. And the upgrades that have been done there. I mean, you really have the first true, high-speed system, from Detroit over to Chicago in the Midwest. And, we're still working out the issues around signaling there too, but we should be in a pretty good place in a few months. And that's going to be a real game changer, I think, for the region. We hope we can add more service out there as a result of faster running times and the ability to turn equipment more readily. So it's Michigan and the work that we're doing there tied in with the infrastructure work, all the way into Chicago, to me is going to be just as transformative as a new bridge over the Potomac River here and the upgrades to the old RFMP down to Richmond.
One of the things, there was talk about a lot of uncertainty because of these times, and somebody had asked, what trends do you believe will prevail in the rail industry?
Well, I actually think there will be a pretty good for intercity passenger service. I mean, I really do, because I think the product we have allows people to not be as confined. And I think that's why the ridership on the long distance trains, right, particularly the sleepers. I mean, that's where we'll have a few dozen people, a couple dozen people in our coaches, but our sleepers are largely sold out because it gives people a bit of a sanctuary. And I think people will feel more comfortable because they can distance themselves, for the most part, on our trains than you can on an airplane. I mean, you don't have someone, you don't have that center seat issue too, which is uncomfortable, right? And I mean, a few of the folks here, I have not traveled at all, and so, but a few of my colleagues who have taken airplanes, you get a real variety of just really horror stories about flying right now. In some cases, they have the whole airplane to themselves. Right? This is great. Bad for the airline, but great for you. And then you have these stories where everybody's on top of each other. It's very uncomfortable. So, yeah, I think the future will be good for us. I'm more concerned about transit. I think the commuting patterns are going to really change dramatically. And I mean, that stuff, particularly the fixed guideways stuff, subways and light rail systems, they just can't automatically adapt to that. I mean, it takes, well, you just can't. But like I said, I think for us, what's going to be interesting to me, I think leisure travel will always be strong on trains. I think people like taking trains. They like the experience of taking trains. I think in areas of the country, regions like the Midwest, rail service, which is good and fairly robust, I think people will come back to that. What I'm going to really wonder is really the business travel, right? I mean, most of our state-supported services, the majority of people are not business travelers. They're largely people traveling to visit friends and families or students. There is a group of people who are traveling on business, but they're not the majority. Whereas on the Acela, it's like 85% of the people that ride Acelas are on business travel, right? And it'll be interesting to see, what happens to that business travel. And, what do we do in that situation? I mean, do we create one type of service that's largely, if we're not filling up these new train sets where you combine sort of like an Acela first class and Acela, they're going to call it Acela class, not business class, but Acela class. And then something else that would be more like the regional trains, right? If the demand just isn't there, is that one way of sort of doing a different kind of product offering and doing more efficiency with your services? I mean, a lot of ideas are being kicked around right now over that. But I think the big thing, Al, to answer the question directly, is sort of what will the business travel trends be on these services? And I'll not to blab on, but you look at the Capital Corridor service between Sacramento and the Bay Area. I mean, something like 80% of that is commuter service, people going back and forth to work each day. Same with a lot of our service in San Diego, at least down to say Solana Beach, perhaps. Most people are commuting into and out of LA. That's where it's going to be interesting to see, and that's why I think some of the state partners who I work with are worried. They're very much worried about will these people be traveling 5 days a week to their offices, or will they be not traveling 5 days a week to their offices?
Yeah, a lot of uncertainty around that. And I think some of the questions were following up on the impact of COVID and using trains as a mode of transportation. And I think Amtrak has been kind of a leader in the industry in combating the disease and implementing a lot of things on your trains. Has there been any feedback from that, from your customers, and what is your initial response as you're hearing?
I think for the most part, in terms of the cleaning and the sort of hygiene elements, I think most of our passengers feel like we're doing a good job on that there's a real forward-leaning sense of getting the trains as clean and as sterile as we possibly can. The issue, Al, frankly, it's this larger societal issue of those who wear masks and those who don't. And we've had a number of dust-ups on our trains. And it's not so much between our crews and passengers, but between passengers and passengers, And we've had to deal with that. We have our crews have masks. If someone, I do it. We all do it. We get out of the car, you forget. Oh my God! And then I see someone staring me down who has a mask. Oh my God! I left it in the car. You go back and get it, because it's the right thing to do. So we have masks, because sometimes people just forget them. So we have masks on the trains, and we hand them out. And we try to, if someone's not wearing their mask when they're moving about the train or getting on and off the train, they're reminded gently about that. But that seems to be the biggest issue. seems to be the biggest issue. Like I said, our ridership on the corridor is pretty flat. It's really way down, and so we don't have a whole lot of folks every day riding the trains. We can kind of manage it. I talked with New York State folks have been carefully monitoring the mask wearing and trying to work with local management if there's issues on the trains. We've exhorted our crews to lead by example, and they're required to wear their masks while they're working. And, if there's an incident where they're not, we try very hard to find out who and where and counsel them so that they understand that that's part of their responsibility.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you this question. I can't say that this has been an issue, at least from state of Michigan and many of our advocacy groups, but it'll give you a chance to at least respond to it. It says, advocacy groups and government have expressed desire to work with Amtrak to resolve issues, but Amtrak seems less so. Why? And maybe you can explain some of the good things that have gone on too.
In all my time, one of the first things I learned when I got here, I got here in June of '94, and we were going through the business unit development at that time. It was just really getting started, taking on form and shape. And then, we got ourselves into that whole glide path to self-sufficiency. You may remember that awful chapter in Amtrak's history. And we agreed to do that. And the board kind of it was a political board, and it was the Clinton administration. It was Alice Rivlin, who was running OMB at the time, made this demand that we will continue to fund you at decreasing amounts, and you will get to zero in 5 years. And we did that. We went along with that, and it really it really wrecked us. And as part of that, what did we do? We started eliminating or proposing to eliminate our long distance service. I mean, a number of trains were lost. People forget the Montrealer, the Desert Wind, the Pioneer. There were the Atlantic City service, maybe not so much that as a result of just all the buses going there, but we shed a bunch of services. There was a third overnight train to Florida at the time, the Silver Palm, that got truncated. There was just, as I said, we lost or proposed to lose a lot of the long distance service. And Congress would not permit that. And I remember, it was really the mayors, right, who got organized and went up to Capitol Hill and really just went at both our numbers, our methodology, and just the whole idea of eliminating these services. They were really, the voice of opposition. The unions were too, but the mayors really coalesced, and it was from everywhere. I mean. And I thought to myself, I had just gotten through that, and I was appointed VP of Government Affairs. I thought to myself, if those guys were on our side, we would really be a juggernaut, And so Ray Lang and I and a few others put together a strategy to engage the mayors. And over the years, I think that has been very, very effective. I think advocacy today is very different than it was 20 years ago, particularly with Congress and particularly with the advent of so much of this is digital. It's more impactful, I think, when you do it, when you do it in person, whether it's at a state capitol or here with Congress. I think those are still the most impactful ways of getting your views across. Letters, they're still somewhat effective, but I really think the in-person is that. Now, I can't really speak for, how the company. I still think we meet regularly with the RPA, and we meet regularly with our unions, and we meet regularly with others who have a stake in this and who want to support the development and the advancement of rail passenger service. I think, and there are times, and it's like it's not just now; it's been in the past too. There are times when they're very happy with us, and there are times when they're very frustrated with us. And I think it's important that there always be strong advocacy, and that it be somewhat, when I say united, I think it's important that there's a coalescence of what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to, hitting Congress with 5 or 6 things that are somewhat, disparate from the main. The main should be, we want to preserve as much service as we can, and we want to grow what we've got. I mean, that ought to be the message in all cases. And to do that, rail needs to be an equal partner in obtaining the funding necessary to do that. And we achieved that by getting into the surface bill, because that's where the money was, and being tied to that cycle of reauthorization. And I think we just have to keep advocating for that. But I think, by and large, I see, them come in here to the offices when we were doing meetings in person. So I'm sorry if there's a feeling out there that we're not listening to advocacy groups. I hope that I hope that changes. Hey, the other thing too, I don't know, I just, someone sent me an article this morning that, speaking of rail in Florida, which, when you look at Florida and you look at what they have today in terms of rail service, they ought to look like California. So should Texas, really. It's really a shame that some of these states where you have these major cities and you do have the ability to connect them, that there's not more service there, because it would really make a difference. But be that as it may, it is what it is. The Brightline service, had brought on they had brought on the Branson Group, and now I guess they've separated. So to me, it's interesting news. I mean, Virgin has had a lot of problems, lately, but there was a lot of buzz, when they co-branded with Brightline, and now they're separating themselves. And I don't know what that augurs, for the future in terms of how you do this stuff, because I still think that largely what we do is going to be, a public. It should be run like a business. I mean, you should do what you can to run it as well as you can, obviously, but it's always going to have a public service element to it. There's just it's indivisible from that. And the Brightline operation, I was always, Gene Skorupowski and I have been lifelong friends, and I've followed that very, very closely as they were developing it down there. It's still right now, even though they've suspended, I think, most, if not all, of their service as a result of the virus, but they're still building their track over to Orlando. And it'll be interesting to see if they're able to turn a profit on that. Mm-hmm. Because, really, Miami to Orlando, that you would think that would be like, and that's the Florida East Coast Railroad is fast track. It's a very good railroad. And what they're building, from Cocoa over to Orlando, dedicated rail, high speed, it ought to be a no-brainer. But it'll be interesting to see how well that does going forward. And that maybe will help, drive more rail development in Florida. They just didn't want to, we go down there, we're the gamers that we were, and meet with a parade of DOT secretaries from Florida, and they, as long as the Brightline thing was in play and they were using private money for the most part to do that, they really didn't want anything that would bring about the need for Florida state subsidy funds. But, I'll tell you, the other thing too, and this sort of ties up to another question. We talk about these expansion opportunities that we're still looking at, and this was one of the things that I always, I sort of dreamed about what we could do with the state services, is if you do the second frequency to Minneapolis, St. Paul, so it's a state-supported service, Minnesota becomes a 209 state. And then you add in, the 3 states down on the Gulf Coast, all of a sudden you've got 4 new state partners. And, that gets you up to about 22 states that would be participating in 209. And arguably, you're not going to get Hawaii or Alaska. So, 24 is kind of like the halfway point there. And maybe someday Indiana comes back, and maybe we get out to Iowa and we get to 24, 25. That to me would be, almost as good as getting to a zero operating support, to be able to say that half of the country buys services that would not otherwise be provided.
Well, Joe, thank you for your candor and your thoughtful presentation, and congratulations on your upcoming retirement, and thank you for all your service to the Amtrak in the States.
It's easy to be candid when you have 39 more days. All right.
All right, thanks.
Everybody. Take care.
Bye,
Stay
Vic.
safe. Thank you.
Everybody, this will conclude the day.